As much as this topic has been addressed many times, it's still the most frequent question I get asked about time signatures. And that is, what's the difference between 3/4 and 6/8? Don't they just add up to the same thing? Yes and no. Let me try and explain this to you from both a general music perspective as well as from a bit of a drummer's perspective, because I do play the drums. First, we need to understand what a time signature represents. So a time signature is these two numbers that you might see at the beginning or somewhere in a piece of music that are one on top of the other. They're not a fraction. You realize there's no line in the middle of those two numbers, so they're just two numbers stacked on top of each other that represent a repeated cycle of stressed and unstressed or partially stressed beats. More on that later. This repeated cycle is what we call a bar or a measure in music, and bars are separated by vertical lines called bar lines. A time signature will tell us how long that bar is. The bottom number tells us the value of the notes we're talking about. So in this case, if it's a 4, we are talking about quarter notes or crotchets. If it was an 8, we would be talking about eighth notes, also known as quavers. And if it was a 16, we would be talking about 16th notes, also known as semiquavers. This could go on. The top number, on the other hand, is going to tell us the maximum number of that particular kind of note that we could put in one bar before we're going to draw that vertical bar line and restart our counting from 1 in the next measure of music. So what is the difference between a 3/4 time signature and a 6/8 time signature? 3/4 would tell us that we have a maximum of 3 quarter notes in a bar, and 6/8 tells us that we have a maximum of 6 eighth notes in a bar. But if you know basic music theory, you would realize that 1 quarter note is equivalent to the length of 2 eighth notes. So mathematically, they add up to exactly the same length. To put it in a nutshell, 3/4 is considered a simple time signature, while 6/8 is considered to be a compound time signature. Simple time signatures consist of beats which are divided into twos, while compound time signatures consist of beats that are further subdivided into groups of threes. If you're wondering what a beat is, in its most basic sense, a beat is a constant repeated pulse that we feel in a song or a piece of music. Future Crystal jumping in here to point out that if you've ever been in a band or orchestra situation with a conductor, conductors just make it so much easier to visualize time signatures because they are literally visually giving us the pulse of the music to follow. While I'm not a conductor, I can make an attempt at some basic conducting here so that you can hopefully visualize it as well. If I were to conduct a 3/4 beat, this would be a simple triple time signature. I would have a cycle of 3 movements with 2 subdivisions in each. So that might be something like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and... The downbeat was always on 1 going down, and there were 2 more movements to add to this kind of triangular cycle. Whereas for a 6/8 time feel, that is a compound duple time signature. There will only be 2 main movements that repeat, so it could be something like 1 and a 2 and a 1 and a 2 and a... And there would be 3 smaller subdivisions in each of those. So you can see for a 6/8 kind of conducting, there are only 2 movements that form the cycle of every bar. When you're listening to a song that seems to be in either 3/4 or 6/8, you would want to be trying to feel where that main pulse is. Are you feeling it in a repeated cycle of 2, or are you feeling it in a repeated cycle of 3? If you're a drummer and there are drums in the piece, the most obvious giveaway can often be the location of the snare backbeat. So in a regular 4/4 rock beat, our snare emphasis is usually on 2 and 4, and it might sound something like this. That's a simple quadruple time signature, which means there are 4 beats in the bar, and each of those beats is further divided into 2 smaller units. For a 6/8 time signature, we now have 2 beats, and so our backbeat is usually going to fall on beat 2, which will be the 4th eighth note in the bar. Here's an example of how that might sound. Now in 3/4 time, we don't necessarily have a fixed backbeat. It could be on count 2 and 3, as in a more waltz feel. Or it could be only on count 3. Or there might be other notes in between as well. If you want to check out more examples of this, have a look at my video on how to play in 3/4 time, because I go into a couple grooves in more detail there. For some of you, that will be enough to figure out the difference between a 3/4 time signature and a 6/8 time signature, but there will be some of you who would probably be wondering things like, why can't we just take that bar of 6/8 and count it as 2 faster bars of 3/4? Like, instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, just go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and then we don't even need any 6/8 time signatures at all. Now, the strict answer to that is you could do that, and if that's how it works in your head, then more power to you. But you're basically taking what would have been 8 bars of 6/8 and turning them into 16 bars of 3/4 at double the speed, and now your drum beat, which was nicely repeated as 1 bar of 6/8, is going to be 2 bars of 3/4, and in my opinion, it's just unnecessarily complicated. In situations like that, I'd say just go with Occam's razor, take the simplest solution. If it makes the most sense and it is the easiest to write in that time signature, just use that time signature. I feel the confusion here usually arises due to a lack of understanding of what a time signature is or is meant to be. We might be getting a little bit philosophical here, but bear with me, I'll try and keep it short. Humans like categorizing things, right? So language itself was created to help us categorize objects in the world so that we can make sense of it. Similarly, time signatures help us to categorize and make sense of music. And so a time signature is one way that we define the length of a recurring cycle of music, which we call a bar or a measure. But that's not the only thing it tells us. It also tells us the pattern of usually stressed beats within that measure. So in summary, a time signature is not just a mathematical rule that tells you the length of the bar, it also implies a particular feel to that bar or to the notes in that bar. While both 6/8 and 3/4 might describe the same length, they imply different feels. These stress patterns are not a hard and fast rule, but they are what we would usually expect to find within the bar. So what are these stress patterns? In 3/4 time, beat 1 is your strongest beat in the bar, followed by beat 3, which is your secondary emphasis, and beat 2 is the weakest beat. For 6/8, our strongest beat is also on count 1, but our secondary stressed beat is now on the 4th 8th note, which would be our second pulse in the bar. If we were to count this particular bar of 6/8 as 2 measures of 3/4, then we would expect to find the first count and the 4th count of equivalent strength, but that would not be the case for a song that was written in 6/8 time. I hope that helped clear up for you some of the mystery of why we use these 2 different time signatures, and will also help you to identify those time signatures more accurately when you're listening to music. I find that musicians who learn mostly by listening might not see why these are so different, because you just hear the song, you naturally hear whatever stress pattern is being played, and then you just interpret it accordingly. But if you're a musician who is more on the classical side and you regularly sight read pieces, you might not have ever heard this particular sequence of notes in this composition before, and knowing the expected stress patterns of the time signature is just going to give you a better idea of what the composer had in mind when they were writing the piece. Congratulations for making it to the end of the video. Now the ball is in your court to go practice listening to songs to see if you can correctly identify 3/4 or 6/8 time feels. Instead of letting you listen to them in this video now, I'm just going to make a comment below and list a couple 3/4 and 6/8 songs that I have heard. I'll pin this comment and then I'll reply to it with the answers so that you can check after you listen to them, I hope. If there are any other songs that you know of that are in 3/4 or 6/8, or you are just confused by a time signature of a particular song, just leave a comment with a link to that song so that we can all have a listen and hopefully help you out with your time signature dilemma. That will be it. Take care, happy drumming, and I'll see you next time. That went on for a while.